Let's talk about something we all suspect, but rarely say out loud. Have you ever wondered if someone is secretly thinking about you every night, even though they act like you never crossed their mind? Maybe it was a breakup, maybe a friendship, drifted, or maybe, just maybe, you walked away from something toxic. But deep inside, something tells you they're not really over it. Here's the problem most people face. We're taught to believe that if someone doesn't say it, then it's not real. That if they don't text, call, or show emotion, they must not care. That silence equals closure. But what if I told you that's not always true? What if I told you they're losing sleep over you, but they'll never admit it? Let's flip the script. Let's break the illusion that the person who seems emotionally untouched is the one in control. Because in Stoic relationships, and in real life, it's often the one who appears calm, grounded, and distant who's actually holding the most power. This video isn't about revenge. It's not about playing games. It's about clarity, about helping you recognize the hidden truths behind cold behavior and giving you the emotional intelligence to detach with peace, not confusion. We'll expose 7 brutally honest reasons why. They're up at night thinking about you, and no, they won't text you about it. They won't show it, but you'll learn to see it anyway. Stick around to the very end, because in the final part, we'll unpack the ultimate Stoic perspective that can change how you view attachment forever. 1. The silent obsession. They don't talk about you. They don't mention your name. Their social media doesn't show a trace of your presence. You walk past them and they barely flinch. No texts, no calls, just silence. From the outside, it looks like they've moved on, unbothered, healed, maybe even happier without you. But here's what you don't see. The countless nights they've stared at the ceiling, reliving conversations, replaying memories, scrolling through old photos while battling with an ego that refuses to admit what's real. Obsession doesn't always look loud. Sometimes it's quiet, hidden, controlled, and it often shows up in silence. We live in a world that rewards emotional detachment. To show feelings, especially after conflict, heartbreak, or abandonment, is often viewed as weakness. So people wear masks. They perform apathy. They weaponize silence. They convince everyone around them, and even themselves, that they've let go. But there's a difference between forgetting and forcing yourself to forget, between peace and pretense. And when someone is truly unbothered, they don't feel the need to suppress anything. It's only when you're still holding on that denial becomes your daily armor. Have you ever experienced this in reverse? You wake up in the middle of the night with a name in your mind. No reason, just a feeling. You think of a moment that happened months ago, maybe even years, but somehow your heart still reacts. Your chest tightens. You wonder why it still matters. That's what they're experiencing now, but their pride won't let them acknowledge it. That's why they don't reach out. That's why they keep it inside. They're still emotionally connected to you, but they've decided that silence protects their dignity. It's a war between what the heart feels and what the ego permits. Here's where the pattern starts. They stop watching your stories, but only after they've seen everything. They remove you from their feed, but not their memory. They stop reacting to your posts, yet you still linger in their thoughts. They ask mutual friends how you're doing, but tell them not to mention it. They visit the same places hoping for a glimpse, and if they happen to see you, they act indifferent. It's a performance of detachment meant to hide an emotional storm they haven't figured out how to handle. They're trying to convince themselves that you don't matter, but the harder they try, the more energy they give to your absence. And it's not just your presence that haunts them, it's your growth that disturbs them most. Because you didn't crumble, you didn't chase, you didn't shrink, you didn't fall apart in the ways they expected you to. They assumed silence would break you, that indifference would destroy you. Instead, you rose, you moved forward. You began to live, not in rebellion, but in freedom. And that's what keeps them up at night. Not just who you were, but who you're becoming without them. You see, people don't lose sleep over people they've forgotten. They lose sleep over unresolved emotion, over guilt they never faced, over feelings they never processed, over the realization that they let go of something real, something rare. But they won't admit that because that would mean confronting themselves. That would mean looking in the mirror and accepting the fact that they caused the distance, that they pushed away the one person who actually cared. And that kind of honesty is terrifying to someone who's still protecting their pride. There's something else you need to know. The late-night spiral is real. During the day, distractions keep them occupied. Work, social media, friends, noise. That keeps the mind away from what it fears. But when the world gets quiet, so do they. That's when the mind plays its cruelest games. It replays everything, every moment, every word, every mistake. They wonder if you think of them. They imagine you with someone else. They question whether you ever truly cared. And sometimes in that darkness they cry. But come morning, the mask goes back on. It's easy to look at their composure and think you were the only one affected. That's what they want. That's what the ego wants, to be seen as the one who moved on first, who healed faster, who won. But Stoicism reminds us that true peace has no need for performance. If someone were truly healed, they wouldn't need to pretend. If they were truly over you, they wouldn't need to erase you. Deleting you from their life is not evidence of strength. It's often proof of unresolved pain. In Stoic relationships, the most powerful thing you can do is remain unmoved by the appearance of indifference, because that's all it is, an appearance, a facade built on unspoken emotions and suppressed truths. You don't need to chase closure. You don't need to expose their obsession. You don't need to call it out, because truth has a way of surfacing without your effort. You weren't forgotten. You were buried beneath layers of ego, shame, and fear. You were significant, and deep down they know it. That's why their mind won't let them sleep. That's why they flinch when they hear your name, even if they pretend they don't. That's why they still carry your energy in the corners of their soul they don't dare show anyone. But don't let that tempt you. Don't let their hidden feelings draw you back into confusion, because while they may be obsessed in silence, it doesn't mean they're ready for truth. And until they confront themselves, they have nothing to offer you except more silence, more ego, more cycles. This is your freedom. To know that you made an impact without having to prove it. To stand firm in your own healing, your own growth, your own peace. To live so fully that even their sleepless nights can't disrupt your daylight. Let them wonder. Let them spiral. Let them play it cool. You don't need their confession. You don't need their apology. The truth is already speaking, in their silence, in their absence, in their sleepless nights. And if you've ever doubted your worth, let this be your reminder. People don't obsess over what's forgettable. They don't lose sleep over what's replaceable. You weren't just a chapter, they're still stuck on your page. 2. Ego versus emotion. There's a war raging inside them, even if the surface looks calm. It's the classic inner conflict between ego and emotion, between what they feel and what they're willing to admit. They're losing sleep because they feel the pull of something. Unresolved, maybe love, maybe regret, maybe guilt, but they also feel the sting of pride. And that pride is loud. It tells them, you can't go back, you can't reach out, you can't admit you were wrong. And so, the emotions pile up quietly like storm clouds behind a sealed window. You don't see the flood building, but it's there. They feel everything. They just refuse to show it. Let's be honest. How many people have we known who would rather suffer in silence than send a simple message? Who would rather live in tension than risk vulnerability? It's common, because the ego has one mission: to protect the self-image, to keep up appearances, to avoid any situation where it might lose control. But emotions, they don't play by those rules. They erupt when we least expect it. They echo when we try to quiet them. And for someone who's built their identity around strength, independence, or indifference, feeling something deep, especially for someone they claim to be over, feels like an identity crisis. Now think about how they acted after you walked away. Did they try to prove they were fine? Did they show off, post photos, suddenly get busy, or seem happier than ever? That's not a coincidence. That's a calculated response driven by ego. They're trying to convince the world and themselves that they're unaffected. But emotion is patient. It waits. It doesn't need to shout. It knows that time always brings truth to the surface. That's why months can pass, and suddenly they're back in your mind. That's why years later you might still cross paths and feel that tension, that unfinished energy between you. It never really goes away when it's never been processed. The longer they ignore their emotions, the more those emotions turn inward. It's not just about you anymore. It's about the parts of themselves they abandoned. Maybe they never learned how to apologize. Maybe they've never admitted fault in any relationship. Maybe they think reaching out means surrendering their worth. But here's the twist. In Stoic relationships, strength isn't in pretending nothing hurts. Strength is in the courage to acknowledge it and act with integrity. So when they ignore their emotions, they're not being strong. They're being trapped. And that trap becomes a loop. Every time they think of you, the ego tells them to stay silent. Every time silence hurts, the emotion rises up. Every time the emotion rises, the ego pushes it back down. That's why they lose sleep. That's why they overthink. That's why they feel exhausted but can't explain why. It's emotional warfare, a private hell no one else sees. The irony is that they believe silence keeps them safe. But silence is what isolates them. It turns pain into loneliness. It turns regret into bitterness. They can't even tell their closest friends what's really going on. They're afraid to be vulnerable. And vulnerability, real, raw vulnerability, is the only path to healing. So they stay stuck. Sometimes they lash out. Sometimes they talk badly about you, not because they hate you, but because it's the only way they can express what they're afraid to feel. Criticism becomes a mask for longing. Indifference becomes a performance of pain. Let's not forget, ego isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet. Sometimes it wears a smile. Sometimes it says, "I'm happy for you," while burning inside. Sometimes it says, "I hope you're doing well," while secretly wishing you weren't. These contradictions are not because they're bad people. They're just human, flawed, scared, unhealed. Most people never learn how to process the storm within them, and so they let ego steer the ship even when it's headed straight for emotional shipwreck. But what does this mean for you? It means you have to be careful not to interpret their silence as peace or their coldness as closure. Their ego might be driving, but their emotions are still wide awake. That's why the most important thing you can do right now is hold your center. If you're watching this and it's resonating, pause for a second. Like this video and comment number 1 below if this is speaking to your situation right now. It's a way of letting yourself be seen without shame. You're not alone in this experience, and if you haven't yet, subscribe to the channel. We're building something deeper here, a space where emotional truth, personal power, and stoicism come together to reshape how we love, let go, and grow. Now, returning to their inner conflict, this is where it gets even more real. There comes a point where emotion starts leaking through the cracks. They might text you out of nowhere with something random. They might like an old post. They might find an excuse to bump into you. These are signs of the ego loosening its grip, but even then, they're testing the waters. They're waiting to see if it's safe to be honest. And you have a choice. You can engage, you can respond, or you can remain rooted in the peace you've built, especially if you've seen this cycle before, because without self-awareness, nothing changes. They'll reach out, but bring the same patterns. They'll say they've missed you, but act like nothing's changed. And unless they've done the hard work, the painful, slow inner transformation, you're just stepping back into the same storm. That's where Stoicism comes in again. This philosophy teaches us that emotions are natural, but they must be ruled by reason. We don't ignore them, but we don't let them control our actions, and we definitely don't let someone else's emotional confusion drag us out of alignment. So even if they're losing sleep, even if their ego is crumbling, even if part of you still wants to be there, you have to ask, are they still ruled by pride, or are they ready to choose peace over performance? If it's the former, let them stay in the storm. Don't be the lighthouse they refuse to swim toward. Let them find their own way out, and if it's the latter, they'll show you, not with a cryptic message, but with honesty, humility, and accountability. Until then, keep growing, keep rising, keep choosing yourself, because real love is not built on ego games. It's built on clarity, communication, and courage. Until they find those things within themselves, they don't belong in your peace. And that's the truth. No matter how deep their feelings are, if their ego still rules them, they are not ready. They might dream about you. They might cry over you. They might tell their friends they can't stop thinking about you, but they won't change, not unless they confront themselves. And that's a journey they have to take alone. Let them take it. Don't interrupt their lessons. Don't save them from the growth they need. That's not stoicism. It's self-betrayal. Stay grounded. You're not heartless for protecting your peace. You're wise for refusing to be pulled back into confusion. They may never admit it, but their sleepless nights are real. Their longing is real. But until their actions match that truth, don't trade your healing for their hesitation. 3. The power of absence. Absence is often misunderstood. To many, it looks like distance, like abandonment, like the end of connection. But in reality, absence is one of the most powerful forces in human relationships. It does what presence cannot. It creates space for reflection, for revelation, and for truth to emerge without distraction. When you remove yourself from someone's life, especially when they expected you to stay, it disrupts their internal balance. It forces them to feel the gravity of your presence through your lack of it. And that is when they begin to realize just how much space you actually took up, not in their schedule, but in their mind, their emotions, and their soul. You were once a constant, a sound in the background of their daily life, a text they could expect, a comfort they assumed would always be available. And now, silence. The notifications stopped. The emotional energy they once absorbed without even noticing is gone. And in that quiet void, a strange discomfort starts to grow. They won't say it out loud, but they feel it. The ache, the restlessness, the confusion. They walk through familiar routines and wonder why they feel disoriented. It's because your absence isn't just physical, it's energetic, it's spiritual, it's psychological. And it lingers in places they can't clean out with distractions. That's the beauty of true detachment. Not as punishment, not as manipulation, but as a form of respect. Respect for your boundaries, your peace, and the realization that presence should be earned, not assumed. In Stoic relationships, we don't run from people, we rise above patterns. We step back not to hurt them, but to heal ourselves. But make no mistake, your absence does something profound. It triggers reflection. It forces the other person to finally sit with what they refused to acknowledge while you were around. When you were there, they could ignore the tension. They could deflect. They could escape into arguments, power plays, or temporary highs. But when you leave, there's nowhere to hide. The mirror gets clearer. The noise gets quieter. The truth gets louder. This is why they lose sleep, because in the stillness of night, your absence becomes deafening. Not seeing you, not hearing from you, not being able to predict your reactions, it all adds up to a disorienting emotional silence. Their mind starts chasing shadows. Did you move on? Do you still think about them? Are you happier without them? That uncertainty paired with the guilt or regret they've buried, creates a loop of mental exhaustion. And instead of resting, they wrestle. Every night, they scroll, they reminisce. They might even draft messages they never send, but they won't break the silence because ego still holds the leash. So they sit with their torment, secretly hoping your absence will turn back into presence on its own. But it won't, not this time. You've pulled your energy back, and that changes everything. They're realizing now that the attention, the warmth, the emotional support, they weren't just background noise. They were fuel, they were comfort, and without it, they're running on empty. Some people don't recognize the value of presence until it becomes absence, and some don't understand what they lost until you stop making yourself available for them to take it for granted. But you're not doing this to prove a point. You're doing it because it's necessary. Your soul needed room to breathe, your heart needed a boundary, and your life needed a realignment with peace. You didn't leave to create pain. You left to find clarity. And now, the very thing they feared, being left behind, is the very thing teaching them the cost of their choices. Here's the paradox of absence. The less you chase, the more they remember. The less you explain, the more they replay. The less you react, the more they analyze. In trying to understand your silence, they start to uncover the impact of their own actions. They wonder if they were too careless, too cold, too consumed with themselves to notice what you were offering. They wonder if you were already slipping away while they were too busy performing detachment. And now they can't reach you, not emotionally, not spiritually, maybe not even physically. That's the real consequence. Not a fight, not a dramatic ending, but distance that feels like a lifetime in the span of weeks. And for someone who once thought they had you figured out, your absence becomes a haunting mystery. This is the power you hold, not in loud declarations, not in dramatic exits, but in quiet self-respect. You don't need to chase, convince, or prove. You just need to be gone, fully, truly, intentionally absent from the cycle they used to pull you into. And in that absence, you become more present to yourself. Your energy stops leaking into places it was never valued. Your time stops being spent trying to fix what refuses to grow. And your soul begins to remember what peace actually feels like. This is the essence of Stoicism. Not emotional suppression, but emotional sovereignty. Not control over others, but control over yourself. You no longer seek resolution from someone who's still avoiding responsibility. You no longer demand recognition from someone whose vision is clouded by pride. You walk away, not to hurt them, but to save yourself. And yet even as you heal, they unravel. Quietly, privately, internally, your absence becomes the teacher they never expected. It becomes the mirror they can't escape. And maybe, just maybe, it becomes the reason they finally change. But not for you, for themselves. Because true change doesn't happen when people feel pressure. It happens when they feel consequence. And your absence is the consequence of their disregard. It's the echo of all the times they didn't listen. It's the shadow of every moment they thought you'd never leave. And now that you're gone, they finally understand what they never took the time to appreciate. Your presence was a gift, one they opened carelessly and one they can't rewrap now that it's gone. So let them lose sleep, not out of cruelty, but out of realization. Let them sit with their thoughts. Let them feel the distance. Don't rescue them from the discomfort your absence creates, because that discomfort, that's where growth begins. That's where the ego starts to crack. That's where the heart starts to speak, and maybe they'll finally learn, not just about you, but about themselves. About how easy it is to take love for granted, about how hard it is to live without it, about how dangerous it is to mistake presence for permanence. But as for you, stay in your absence, not with bitterness, but with peace, not with resentment, but with strength. You don't need to return to prove anything. You don't need to explain why you left. Your absence speaks volumes, and in Stoic relationships, it's often the silence that delivers the final truth. They may never admit it, but they're not the same since you walked away. Something shifted, something sank. And every night, as they lie awake wondering what went wrong, one word echoes through the silence: you. 4. Behavioral clues they can't hide. No matter how well someone hides their emotions, the body always finds a way to speak. Words can be controlled, text messages can be deleted, and facial expressions can be trained. But behavior over time always reveals what pride tries to conceal. If they're losing sleep over you, it won't always come in the form of a dramatic confession or a heartfelt message. Most of the time, it leaks through in the smallest, most unintentional actions. You might notice them lingering in places they once told you they were done with. You might see their name pop up in the viewers list of a story they accidentally clicked. You'll hear from mutual friends that they asked about you, then quickly brushed it off like it meant nothing. But that's how it starts, little moments of curiosity that betray their claims of indifference. These are the behavioral clues that matter, because while someone can convince the world they've moved on, the unconscious always keeps score. They'll follow you with burner accounts. They'll rewatch your videos without engaging. They'll scroll your feed in the dark and overanalyze every smile, every caption, every person you're seen with. And when you seem too happy, too free, too unfazed, that's when the panic sets in. That's when the sleepless nights become full-blown inner storms, because they expected your world to slow down without them. Instead, it kept turning, and your evolution, your peace, your glow, it feels like rejection to the version of them that assumed they were unforgettable. People will say they're over you, but their energy won't lie. You'll feel them watching you without ever seeing them. You'll sense their presence in digital footprints and echoed behaviors. They'll try to recreate the dynamic they had with you in someone new, but it won't feel the same. It never does, because energy can't be copied. Connection can't be duplicated. You were one of one, and they're realizing it now. That's why they overcompensate. They post more, they flex more, they act louder, wilder, more reckless. They'll make sure you see them living their best life. Not because they are, but because they hope it triggers something in you. They want to reverse the pain they feel by making you question your own growth. But in Stoic relationships, we don't get pulled into emotional bait. We observe. We remain grounded. We know that healing isn't a performance. It's a process. And their behavior, it's not healing. It's hiding. If you're watching this and you've seen these signs, take a second, like this video and comment number 1 below if any of this hits home for you. It's not about calling anyone out, it's about calling yourself forward. You're not imagining things. You're just finally seeing patterns clearly. And if this kind of clarity helps you grow, subscribe to this channel. We go deeper than surface-level advice. This is about truth, power, and emotional mastery. Now, let's go even deeper. They might show up in your life under the guise of checking in, a birthday message, a random emoji, a song they think you'd like. These are not accidents, these are feelers, subtle probes to see if your door is still open. And if you respond with warmth, they'll feel validated. If you respond with distance, they'll spiral further. Why? Because it confirms what they feared, that your peace no longer needs them, that you're whole without their presence. And for someone whose self-worth was tied to being desired, that's a brutal reality to face. Watch how they speak about you to others. If they bring you up with sarcasm, passive-aggressive jokes, or dismissive tones, it's not neutrality, it's pain. They're trying to deflect their own emotion. If they truly didn't care, they wouldn't speak of you at all. Indifference doesn't include commentary, but obsession. Obsession dresses itself in all kinds of outfits: anger, humor, indifference, even praise. They might tell their friends, "I hope they're doing well," while secretly stalking your every move. They might even try to get close to the people close to you just to stay informed. It's not always toxic. Sometimes it's just unhealed. They want to stay connected without risking vulnerability. So they cling to proximity without intimacy. They monitor without engaging. But none of it brings peace, only more confusion. It's not just digital behavior that reveals the truth. Watch what happens when you enter a room unexpectedly. Watch their body language, the shift in posture, the quick glance, the sudden silence. Even the way they avoid eye contact can be telling. Stoicism reminds us that energy always speaks first. And if you've ever walked into a space and felt someone's emotions shift before a single word was spoken, you know exactly what I mean. Their body reacts before their brain can tell it not to. That's the cost of unresolved emotion. It doesn't stay buried forever. It finds a way out. Through tone, through silence, through micro-expressions they can't mask. So don't get caught up in what they say. Watch what they do, because their behavior will always reveal the chapter their words are trying to skip. Some of the most telling clues come through comparison. They'll try to replicate you. A new partner with similar interests, similar looks, similar vibes. They're trying to replace, not heal. And deep down, they know it's not working. They'll find themselves annoyed by things that didn't bother them before. They'll become irritable, short-tempered, restless, because their soul is chasing a feeling they can't recreate. They thought you were a phase, but now they see you were a standard. And when they lose someone who raised the standard, the rest of the world feels quieter, colder, less fulfilling. This is the cost of disconnecting from someone who had genuine presence. The void doesn't just feel empty, it echoes. And they're feeling that now, not in loud, dramatic breakdowns, but in the quiet, mundane moments, brushing their teeth and remembering your voice. Hearing a song you once played and stopping mid-thought. Seeing someone laugh in your style, noticing your scent in a crowd. These are the ghosts of emotional memory, and no matter how hard they try, they can't shake them. Because when the bond was real, it imprints, and no performance can erase that. So yes, they're losing sleep, and no, they'll never admit it, but you don't need their confession to validate your impact. You've seen the clues, you've felt the energy, and more importantly, you've grown past the need for external proof. You're not here to prove your worth through someone else's reaction. You're here to reclaim your peace through inner recognition. That's what Stoicism teaches us, not to numb emotion, but to master our response, to rise above the noise and stay rooted in truth. Their behavior might still fluctuate. They might still play hot and cold. They might still try to pull you back with subtle cues. But you know better now. You see the cycle, and you have the power to step out of it. 5. Why they won't admit it. There's a reason they can't say it out loud. A reason they won't admit they still think about you, that they miss you, that they sometimes sit alone with a knot in their chest, wondering if they made the wrong decision. It's not because they don't feel it. It's because to say it, to actually admit it, would be to unravel everything they've built to protect their ego. Vulnerability, for them, feels like standing naked in a room full of judgment. To speak the truth would mean acknowledging the loss, the hurt, the impact you had. And that requires more than just honesty. It requires courage. And for someone who's used to control, who's accustomed to performing strength, courage isn't easy to access when it means showing emotional wounds. They know the truth. They know you mattered more than they let on. They know your presence brought something real, something grounding, something safe. But to say that out loud now would feel like surrender. It would feel like exposing themselves to the possibility of rejection, to the possibility that you've moved on, to the possibility that their silence caused irreversible distance. So instead, they choose denial, not because they've forgotten you, but because pretending is easier than confronting the pain of their own pride. It goes deeper than just fear of rejection. It's about identity. Many people attach their worth to how they're perceived: strong, independent, unaffected. To admit they've been emotionally destabilized by your absence would threaten the self-image they've worked hard to uphold. They may have built their persona on being the one who always walks away first, the one who feels nothing, the one who's always in control. But now that the silence is echoing, now that the nights feel longer and the distractions no longer distract, they're face to face with a truth they can't unsee. You're still under their skin, you're still in their mind, and no amount of denial can make that go away. But they won't say it. They can't say it, because to do so would make them vulnerable in a way they've never practiced. Vulnerability, for them, feels like danger, and so they stay hidden behind coldness, sarcasm, or a false sense of peace. There's also shame. Maybe they handled things poorly. Maybe they said things they didn't mean, or acted like they didn't care when they did. Maybe they chose ego over connection and now realize they lost something irreplaceable. That shame sits heavy. It tells them you don't deserve to reach out, you don't deserve forgiveness, you messed it up. And rather than confront that shame head on, they bury it beneath distractions. But it doesn't stay buried for long. It comes out in irritability, in overcompensation, in sleepless nights that replay your last conversations over and over again. Still, they won't admit it, because to do so would mean owning their mistakes. And for many, accountability is a mountain too steep to climb when self-worth is fragile. This is the part of the story where Stoicism becomes a guiding light. You're not here to force truth out of anyone. You're not here to pull confessions from silent hearts. Stoicism teaches us that our peace doesn't depend on someone else's admission. It depends on our ability to see reality clearly without needing validation. Their inability to admit their feelings doesn't diminish your impact. It doesn't mean you imagined the connection. It simply means they're not equipped yet to process and express their truth. And that's not your burden to carry. You walked with openness, you gave sincerely, you left with grace. The rest is theirs to face alone. And yet, there's a part of you that may still hope. Hope that one day they'll come back, not with manipulation, not with pride, but with truth. With words like, "I never stopped caring," or "I regret how I handled things." That's a beautiful idea, but it's not something you can wait for. Because the longer you wait for someone to admit something they're not emotionally mature enough to say, the more you delay your own healing. Hope, when rooted in fantasy, becomes a trap. It keeps you tethered to someone's potential instead of their reality. And the reality is this: if they were ready to be honest, they would be. If they had the capacity to be real, they would show up differently. But they're not. Not because they don't feel, but because they haven't grown. They're still living behind the wall of ego, still choosing image over intimacy, still prioritizing pride over peace. What's even more painful is that they may try to rewrite the story. They might say, "It was never that deep," or "We just grew apart." These are deflections, emotional shortcuts designed to avoid the discomfort of facing their own emotional depth. But you know better. You felt the connection, you saw the potential, you experienced the intimacy. Don't let their revisionist memory make you question your own experience. This is another Stoic truth. Never argue with someone who's still protecting a false narrative. Let them live in their version. You don't need to defend yours. Time will do that for you. Sometimes the reason they don't admit it is because they assume it's too late. They believe you've closed the door permanently. They think their silence created a wound too deep to heal. And rather than risk hearing, "I've moved on," they stay in the shadows, secretly hoping you'll make the first move. But you've done your part. You showed up. You stayed soft when it mattered. You left without bitterness. And now your silence isn't a punishment, it's a boundary, one they can't cross unless they come with humility, accountability, and truth. And unless they've done the work to grow, they won't come that way. They'll stay hidden, haunted, sleepless, but still silent. So don't wait for the words. Don't hold space for someone who isn't brave enough to be honest. In Stoic relationships, we value action over promises, integrity over apology, growth over regret. If they can't admit the truth, that's their battle to fight, not yours. Let them stay in the illusion if they need to. You've stepped into the light. You've chosen healing over haunting. And that's where your story begins again. 6. When the night falls. There's something about nighttime that strips away the armor people wear during the day. The distractions dissolve, the masks fall off, and the silence becomes deafening. During daylight hours, they have their routines, their curated smiles, their rehearsed confidence, their performative distractions. They post, they scroll, they socialize, they keep busy. But when the sun goes down and the noise fades, they are left alone with what they've been avoiding. You. Your name becomes a whisper in the back of their mind, and the questions they silenced all day long come flooding in. What if you were the right one? What if they made a mistake? What if they never get another chance to say what they couldn't say when it mattered? These thoughts don't just come once, they repeat, looping through their consciousness until they blur the line between memory and regret. That's what the night does. It magnifies what we suppress. And for them, that means facing the weight of your absence without distraction, without ego, without denial. It hits hardest at the hour when everything else is still. They lie in bed staring at the ceiling, phones in hand, debating whether to reach out. Their thumb hovers over your name. They scroll through your pictures. They reread old conversations, looking for signs. Was there still hope? Did they miss a clue that you were waiting for them to make it right? But they don't text. They don't call. Because that would mean breaking the wall they've built. And behind that wall is fear. Fear of being ignored. Fear of being told it's too late. Fear of hearing you've moved on and their moment has passed. So they sit in silence, letting the anxiety swirl inside, convincing themselves it's better to suffer privately than to risk humiliation. But the suffering doesn't go away. In fact, it intensifies. The mind has no mercy at night. It replays the things they said out of anger, the things they never said out of pride, the memories they didn't appreciate when they had the chance, and what once felt like control now feels like a prison. Because when the night falls, there is no audience, there is no performance. There is only the self, and whatever truth it has been trying to hide. This is where Stoicism becomes more than philosophy, it becomes survival. Because while they're spiraling in emotional loops, you are learning to breathe in the quiet. You are learning that peace does not require resolution, that healing does not demand their confession. You've learned to sit with your own thoughts and not fear them, to embrace solitude instead of filling it with noise. But they're not there yet. They're still reaching for things that numb, their phone, a drink, a meaningless conversation. Anything to avoid the silence that screams your name. And even when they fall asleep, their mind doesn't rest. Dreams become flashbacks. Random moments from your time together surface like emotional hauntings. The smell of your perfume, the sound of your laugh, the look you gave them when you believed in them more than they believed in themselves. These memories are no longer sweet. They sting because they didn't just lose a person. They lost a mirror that reflected back to them a version of themselves they now struggle to find without you. And when they wake up the next morning, nothing feels better. There's a dull heaviness in their chest. They move through their routine like a ghost, emotionally hungover from a night of thoughts they couldn't escape. But again, they say nothing. They post something funny. They pretend everything is okay. But you know better now. You know the truth behind the mask. And even though they'll never admit it, their nights are not peaceful. They are haunted, not by your mistakes, but by their own. The way they chose silence instead of honesty, distance instead of accountability, ego instead of love. And those choices now cost them sleep. And maybe you've been there too. Maybe you remember what it's like to lay awake, wondering if someone is missing you as much as you miss them. Maybe you searched for signs, reread messages, or watched old videos just to feel close again. But now you're not that person. Now, you've seen what happens when you choose peace over longing, when you lean into solitude instead of running from it. And that makes you different. That makes you strong, because emotional clarity is a superpower. And when the night falls on you, there's no more desperation. There's just stillness, growth, acceptance. You might still think of them. That's human. But the difference is you're no longer stuck. You're not clinging to what-ifs. You're not hoping they'll show up with a different story. You've stopped waiting for midnight messages. You've stopped checking if they're online, because now you know that true peace isn't found in someone else's return. It's found in your decision to stop looking back. If this resonates, take a breath and acknowledge how far you've come. And if you feel that quiet strength growing inside you, like this video and comment number 1, if you've ever felt that shift in the night, from emotional chaos to calm confidence. And if this kind of transformation speaks to you, subscribe to the channel. We don't chase people here, we chase truth. And every video is a step closer to emotional freedom through real, grounded stoicism. As for them, they may continue to spiral. They may never admit what they feel. And that's okay, because their journey isn't your responsibility. You were a chapter that offered them depth, love, presence, and truth. And if they can't sleep now, it's because they never truly appreciated what they had while it was there. But you're no longer losing sleep over someone who couldn't choose you when it mattered. That's the win. That's the power. That's the peace they still haven't found. Because when the night falls, you rest, you breathe, you rise again, and they stay stuck in the story they never had the courage to finish. 7. Stoic insight. What it means for you. You've made it this far, not just through the silence of another person, but through your own emotional battlefield. You've felt the sting of being misunderstood, the ache of absence, the heaviness of unanswered questions. And yet here, you are still standing, still breathing, still becoming. That alone is proof of your strength. But now we arrive at a deeper understanding, one that transcends emotional storylines, one rooted in the quiet, timeless philosophy of Stoicism. Because while they're losing sleep over you in secret, while they mask their regret behind ego, while they silently carry the weight of what they can't say, you've been doing something far more powerful, learning how to live without needing their admission. And this is what Stoic relationships teach us in their rawest form. That peace is not something granted to you by others. It is something you grant yourself through discipline, awareness, and the refusal to be held hostage by emotional inconsistency. What does it mean when someone still thinks of you but can't say it? When they still feel your presence but won't show it? When they ache in the dark but stay silent in the light? It means they haven't learned how to face themselves. And your absence, your strength, your evolution, it exposes that gap in them more than anything else ever could. But here's the key, that exposure isn't your responsibility. Their realization isn't your reward. And their regret, as intense as it may be, doesn't deserve to be the anchor that pulls you back into emotional limbo. You have nothing to prove to anyone who couldn't recognize your value when it was freely given. You don't need closure from someone who's still closed off to themselves. You don't need apology, validation, or confirmation from the very person who turned their back when your heart was wide open. That's not bitterness, it's wisdom. That's Stoicism in its most practical form. Letting go not because it's easy, but because it's necessary. Choosing emotional sovereignty over emotional dependency. Recognizing that their inability to express does not reduce your worth. It reveals their limits, not yours. And if they're awake at 3 a.m., thinking of what they lost, that's part of their path. But you have a different calling now. Your journey is about stillness, not struggle, about truth, not tension, about becoming the kind of person who no longer waits for anyone to recognize what's already within. You're no longer chasing clarity from someone who only offers confusion. You're not staying available for someone who disappears when things get real. You're not trying to make sense of mixed signals when your soul already knows what's true. Stoicism teaches us that external chaos can never touch internal order unless we allow it. So what do you allow now? You allow silence to be enough. You allow space between you and their ego. You allow their denial to be their own problem, not your puzzle to solve. Because real power isn't found in emotional control. It's found in emotional detachment from things you cannot change. You cannot change how they see you. You cannot force them to express what they're too ashamed to admit. You cannot reach into their soul and pull the truth out of them. But you can choose not to let that uncertainty consume you anymore. This is what it means to be free. To walk through life without resentment, even for those who hurt you. To remember them with grace, not longing. To feel the echo of their presence without needing to reopen the door. Their sleepless nights are not proof of unfinished business. They're reminders of unfinished growth on their end. But your growth, it's steady, it's grounded, it's no longer tied to their timelines. If they ever evolve enough to be honest, to be open, to be accountable, good. That's their path. But whether they do or not, you've already won, because you've done the work they avoid. You've sat with your pain. You've questioned your patterns. You've broken cycles. You've healed without closure. That's the ultimate victory. Not in their return, not in their confession, but in your ability to move forward while they're still stuck in the past, haunted by what they won't face. Now you understand why they can't admit it. Why the truth stays buried behind pride, silence, and shame. But the most powerful insight is this: you don't need them to. You've outgrown the version of yourself who needed their words to feel complete. You've stepped into a space of clarity where your peace isn't dependent on their behavior. You've become emotionally self-sufficient, and that is the deepest freedom. Because while they might be wide awake at night, scrolling, spiraling, wondering, you're resting, you're creating, you're aligned, and your life is no longer being directed by unspoken feelings. It's being guided by intentional wisdom. Stoicism isn't about emotional coldness, it's about emotional mastery. It doesn't tell you not to feel, it teaches you how to feel fully without becoming enslaved to what others do or don't. So remember this: they may be losing sleep over you. They may never admit it, but that no longer matters. You've awakened to something greater than their silence. You've awakened to yourself, and no one can take that from you, ever. Now you see what was always there but hard to name. Those subtle signs, those sleepless nights, those private struggles they carry while pretending they've moved on. And maybe for a long time, a part of you thought it was your fault that things ended, that their silence was proof you never mattered. But it wasn't. Their silence is not your failure. Their inability to express what they feel doesn't erase the impact you had. If they're losing sleep over you, it's because you meant more than they were ready to admit. But here's the deeper truth. You don't need their words to validate your worth. You've walked through the fire of unspoken emotion and came out refined, not broken. That is the essence of strength. That is the core of Stoicism, not emotional detachment, but inner mastery. You're not waiting on anyone to come back. You're not sitting in someone else's emotional shadow, hoping they'll suddenly evolve. You've reclaimed your time, your energy, your heart, and that's the real power. They may be up at night thinking about you, but you sleep peacefully, knowing you gave what was real. And now, you're free. So if this message resonated with your experience, if you've ever felt the silent pull of someone you left behind, but found strength in choosing peace, like this video and comment #1 below to let your story be part of this movement toward emotional clarity and strength. And if you want more content like this, where philosophy, healing, and truth come together to elevate your relationships and your life, subscribe to the channel right now. Every story, every lesson, every insight is a step toward becoming unshakable. Thank you for watching. Thank you for choosing growth over games. And remember, some people will never admit how deeply they feel, but that doesn't mean you stop becoming the person who no longer needs to hear it. Stay strong, stay grounded, and above all, stay true to yourself.